So we're not fundamentalists. We don't believe that everything we read in the Bible is literal as it is. There are some things that are literal. There are some things that are poetic. There's some things that are analogical. There's historical stuff in the Bible. Who do we rely on? We rely on the church to help us to understand and discern that. But one of the things sometimes people accuse us of is, well, there's certain laws in the Bible that you listen to and others that you don't. Well, if you open up the Old Testament, there's over 600 Old Testament laws. And they're not all the same. They're not all about the same thing. We can actually kind of dive in a little bit more deeply later, we will, and see what the distinctions are with the laws. But you see, Jesus fulfilled the law, therefore, those laws don't matter. Well, if we look at what the Lord had to say, in Matthew chapter 5, he said this, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished." So Jesus is the embodiment of the law. And the law was given to Israel so that they could live a good life, right living. That's the way we have to approach this, right living, is that it was meant to protect and to foster, to orient Israel towards the good, which is God. Right? Everything about Israel centered around God. In fact, the temple was incredibly important. The three types of laws that we can find in the Old Testament are this. There's three distinctions. The first, moral laws. So moral laws, they have their source in divine law. They don't change. Murdering somebody 2,000 years ago is just as wrong as murdering somebody today. Right? The same sexual sins 2,000 years ago, still sins today. Doesn't matter what the world says, right? That you think of the basic law, the governing the self in relationship with God is the same, right? No matter what kinds of pressures or our modern mindset, divine law doesn't change. Moral law doesn't change. It's the same. Ceremonial laws have changed. That's the second type. Ceremonial laws, in a sense, governed right worship. Meaning, the temple was the center of Jewish life. So everything about how they approached worship, mattered. So all this purification stuff, it was important. In fact, we still have a little purification reminder of that at the altar. You see me wash my hands before I invite you to stand and pray. That's a ceremonial washing. But these washings, the ceremonial laws, yes, they were changed over time. They were mutable in a sense. But their importance was that so that prayer and worship was taken seriously, that they followed them. And here we can understand that in the Catholic Mass. There are certain things that are non-negotiable ceremonial laws that are what they are. The bread and the wine. We cannot change out the bread and the wine. The Lord will not be present if I speak the words of consecration over something else. I know y'all tried that in the 70s, but it didn't work. No offense, God bless you, but you started some of this fire. So there's certain things that we cannot change, right? Our postures at Mass, how we worship and stuff, those are like our ceremonial laws still today. Then you have the judicial laws. Now, those are the things that kind of govern right living in culture and society to make sure that things were properly ordered. You can see some of these in the Ten Commandments. You really can see all of them in some way, shape, or form. But there were regulations so that Israel's community was governed and that their social interactions were governed properly. They were so that as a nation they could live rightly. People at their time, when after they received the law and they lived this way, people from other cultures would have noticed they're living differently. There's something to be said about that. But I'm curious, right, so that people would have known. And it also provided them with protection if they were living amongst people who lived differently. It was like that reminder. So those three laws. You got moral laws, they don't change. The moral laws governing Israel, the same moral laws today. Ceremonial laws, ours are different as we are in the time of the new covenant with Mass, but we still have ceremonial laws. And judicial laws. We still have judicial laws in some respects. Sometimes we just don't want to listen to them. In fact, there's a good portion of us that doesn't want to listen to them. right? We've bought more into the culture than we have into the authority of the church. And a perfect example of this is, I want to be a Catholic godparent. Oh, great. What time do you go to Mass? Well, I don't really go to Mass. Okay, well, you need to go to Mass to be a godparent. Well, you're being unfair because I want to be a godparent. You see that this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to us because we're living differently. But to some who grew up in the church and are now living full on in the culture, it doesn't make sense to them. In fact, some of you probably are like, well, Father, you should probably have to be a godparent. No. What is the relationship with God? How are we living? Jesus calls out the Pharisees today because their obsession with certain aspects of those ritualistic type of laws, they lost the point of what the law was about, which was right relationship with God and living orderly. They were more attentive to whether or not you dipped your finger in the holy water when you came in than the person who needed a cup of water to drink. They were more worried about themselves and looking good on the outside than actually growing in holiness with God. You see, the laws that we have within the church are ordered properly as well. And of course, you can just pay attention to certain aspects of these things and ride somebody for it. But you're just as wrong as the Pharisees were when they were trying to ride Jesus for the disregard of things. You see, Jesus, being the author of the law, could dictate and could determine what was and what wasn't, period. And the reason why, as the church, we trust the church is because Jesus willed the church into existence and gave them the authority. Therefore, they're the right interpreters of the law. And if we really are in right relationship with God, you know what? We don't need some the law and the canon law telling us what it means to be a Catholic godparent. We don't need that. You know why? Because we're living it. Our lives will look like that. And what God was saying was pay attention to the stuff that is in you so that you can grow in holiness. Doesn't change the purpose of the law. It helps us to really understand what it means to live it. So when Moses heard or said to the people, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, therefore you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, with your whole being, with your whole strength. You're not half fill in the blank at it. You're doing it. I'm giving myself over to it. I'm living in it. And guess what? You will live a better life if you live like this. Life will be more full. We had basketball, hoops and halos. You remember that? When I told you we had basketball, it was great. I get to yell at the kids and make them run. I got yelled at and had to run when I was a basketball player. But no, I play a lot of ball, so it was great to have them with us. And in the beginning, we were trying to teach them the fundamentals of the game, the rules of the game, and how to play it properly. And after the first half a day, some of them were like, why do we have to keep doing these drills? And so I sat them down. I made them run first. Then I sat them down. And I said, boys and girls, I want you to understand something. And for some reason, the movie came into my mind, Karate Kid, right? Remember the Karate Kid? You remember the original, but now there's some poser movies that happened afterwards, the remakes. But I'm like, no, the original movie. And this couple kids raised their hand. I was impressed. I was like, all right, your parents must have grown up in the 80s because you're watching 80s movies. And I said, there's something in Karate Kid. And immediately, Andy raised his hand, and he's like, you mean the way Mr. Miyagi teaches him, to paint the fence, and he can't understand it, but then later on he understands that really what I was about, teaching him how to block a punch. I was like, you're brilliant. This is amazing. You could preach my own lesson. So then they understood, then the complaining stopped. They worked harder. And by the end of the week, you know what? They were having more fun playing the game of basketball, following the rules, and living according to the fundamentals on the court. It's an analogy for us when it comes to right living in this life as Christians. That the more we orient our lives to it, the more we allow it to be part of us, the better living we will be doing. That's the psalmist, whoever walks blamelessly and does justice, who thinks the truth in his heart, who has it in there, that he will notice there are evil thoughts sometimes inside of him, or that he's had to throw off the unchastity or theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, folly. Doesn't need the law to force him to reject those things or for her to live rightly, but does it at a place from her heart. James says that religion that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. That was the purpose of the law. Christ is the fulfillment of the law, and we still have the law in some way, shape, or form within the church to keep us unstained and oriented towards Him.